Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Creed 2. Any Rocky sequel, which Creed, even though it's a Creed sequel, but it's like Creed 2, Rocky 8, has to kind of address who the lead character, who formerly was Rocky and now is Creed, is at that point. And that is kind of a bigger thing in Rocky 2, and it's a bigger thing in Creed 2, because it's sort of dealing with, well, now that you've sort of somewhat made something of yourself, what are you going to do about it? In addition to the baggage that this film has to take on that the original Rocky 2, I guess, didn't, is that obviously Creed didn't have him fight Drago's son, or him fight Drago, even though that is a hugely important part of the origin of Adonis Creed. So you kind of have a Batman Begins Dark Knight thing. You basically need the villain and the fight that when you first saw Creed that you were thinking about. Even if you thought it was going to be lame, you're like, well, we know they're going to do that. And Creed 2 has them literally do that. And it's kind of interesting because in some ways I'm like, I think Adonis has now done as much with the Rocky legacy as he possibly can as a character. This has a lot to do with Rocky 4. It feels like almost, it is both a follow-up to Creed and Rocky 4, which is kind of an interesting situation. It's like you should know Rocky 4 before seeing Creed 2, as well as knowing Creed. It very much plays within the whole franchise of the film. Creed 2 has to take on a lot, but manages to do it actually really well and maintain the sort of the spirit of the original, even though the director of this, Stephen Cable Jr., is, not Ryan Coogler. This is not written by the same guy who wrote the last one, which was Ryan Coogler, and somebody else whose name will be below because I didn't remember it, but it will when I edit this. This time was written by Sylvester Stallone and Jewel Taylor. Stallone has written pretty much every Rocky movie except for Creed. So this film does feel a lot more like a Rocky sequel because, he wrote like all of them. And you can tell everyone who loves it between the people who nostalgically grew up with Rocky and Stallone representing something to them in terms of masculinity and fatherhood and things like that, to someone who understands completely the franchise and all of its mythos with Stallone. And this film does that in much more of a obvious sequel way than the original Creed did. Creed was getting back to basics. Creed 2 is getting into the fame and the sort of nonsense that you either love or hate of the sequels. Let me tell you this. I know this isn't as good as Creed. Duh. Did anyone expect, come on, that's just, I put Creed pretty high up, and I don't have a Rocky ranking list or whatever, but I put it close. To me, it's close to the original. I really love Creed. And it's directed by a director who really had something to prove, who's hungry, who's working within the studio system, and doing that and making kind of the best kind of studio film that makes theory sense and all this stuff. Stephen Cable Jr. isn't doing that. I don't want to say he's just capable, because I think that's giving him a disservice. What he did is he made a really good Rocky sequel, right? This isn't a bad Rocky sequel. These are pretty much structurally, the reason I mentioned Rocky so much is structurally these are Rocky movies, and that's what this does. But it stays true to being a Creed sequel in that it's doing the indie movie thing. When Ryan Coogler made the original Creed, when he made the first Creed, he very much realized that Rocky was pretty much like an indie movie, like a film that would play at Sundance, is what he said around that. Creed takes on various indie movie ways, and in some ways I understand how people didn't like this as much. It stays almost too long in the whole idea of he doesn't want to fight again after there's an initial fight with Drago, which is disqualified, and then a second fight, obviously at the end. Spoilers, the structure of Rocky movies. In that, it kind of dwells in it, maybe longer than Rocky movies usually would. I think that's because the director is trying to do kind of more of the indie movie thing and dwell in it, and he probably does it too long. I think there's kind of a middle section of this film that was way too long, and it's cut to the fucking chase. You're kind of a fun popcorn movie. I get that you're pushing it in terms of stuff, but it's what are you trying to prove with this existential crisis? There's certain things they have fun with, like having a montage. The Rocky movies are all about montages, and having a montage of him helping out a crying baby was a fun montage where he calls his mom. It's Mom, how do you get this baby to stop crying? I never did that. You have your moments. But for the most part, other than that, I love the ending boxing sequence, which felt epic and earned, and everything Rocky films do is when you get to that end fight sequence, you are so into it and you're cheering cheering, and, you know, I screamed "oh shit" in the theater. It just had that kind of passionate shout from your seat kind of feeling, and it did that in a few times, and mostly because you had two amazingly charismatic leads. I don't think this reboot franchise that it is would be what it has become without Michael B. Jordan and Tessa Thompson, who are two of the greatest, most charismatic actors in Hollywood today, and are frankly under-rewarded for being such. And she even like dresses like cool like Adrian in one sequence and still looks like the coolest person in the world. Tessa Thompson's amazing. Michael B. Jordan's amazing. Without these two actors who are just so charismatic, I just like love watching them completely. It really helps these films. Honestly, that's like kind of the trick to casting anyway, but when you get these reboot films and you don't immediately have someone who's amazingly charismatic, you're like, well, fuck them. This isn't as good as the last time. And, you know, it's not that I think Stallone is a worse actor or something, maybe a little, but I think it's that he brought a different energy to it. And so you're able to accept them and go, hey, that was one guy, this is the other guy, but he's still charismatic and I want to follow him. I don't think Stallone does as good as he did the previous film, but I still thought he was very good. There's, you know, some kind of Rocky subplot. There's a subplot about a lamppost which never gets solved and frankly ruined the whole movie for me. But other than that, Stallone still did a good job. It shows that kind of maybe the best writer for Stallone is like not Stallone, interestingly enough. Dolph Lundgren, who I'm a big Dolph Lundgren fan, I thought was very good in this. He was much better in this than he was in Rocky IV. I think in Rocky IV he's just being physical, he doesn't say very much. The actor who played his son in this was very good, and I like the idea of, you know, him and his son and what happened to him in Russia and what his life was like since then. And I think, like, because that specific story has so much with the origin of who Adonis is, it is a natural fit for this and what's happened with Russia and their cruelty and all this stuff. It doesn't get too political. I would have liked if Adonis had, you know, stopped Russian hacking. I thought about that, but then I realized that's stupid, so he shouldn't actually do that. But Rocky IV was pretty stupid too, so it's not like that would be too off. And like, what are the Russian hackers going to do? Reveal Adonis's dick pics? Like, it's just like, you can't really fight that, I guess. Oh, you can punch anything, you know? It's taking on the legacy that it needs to for the film, and I think that's smart. If this was just doing Clover Lang, it's like, well, where's that going? Like, what's the importance to the Creed family with that? Like, there isn't. That would be cool. I'd love seeing Mr. T. I would love a Mr. T cameo in one of these. That's fine with me. But in terms of a villain, where are you going with that? It has nothing narratively to say. Whereas in Creed 2, you have something there, even though Rocky IV is very silly. And I think to still make that kind of relatable and sort of a little more downbeat than I think a lot of these Rocky sequels would be because of the direction. If I think Stallone had been directing it, it would have been a lot bigger. Stallone, the still bottom line of this is it's a Rocky kind of sequel, like everything with like the guy, there's like a training camp in the desert that feels very much like a Stallone idea, and a lot of the things like the montages feel very much like Stallone, but the imagery in it, particularly like him boxing underwater, like a lot of the beautiful cinematography worked really well. He doesn't seem to use the camera as well as I think Creed did, particularly with the one take things, and he seems to kind of rely on the ideas of the franchise, like use the ideas of it. Sometimes I think this director is more of a studio director than kind of like an auteur working within the studio system, which Coogler very much was. I still kind of liked how he was able to use kind of the genre of Rocky film within him and be a good genre within Rocky director. There haven't actually been a lot of directors who've made these, like the guy who directed the first one, directed the fifth one, Stallone directed 2 through 4, and Balboa, and then, you know, Coogler, and now this guy. And I don't think anyone's totally dropped the ball or anything like that, but I think this guy kind of ends up sort of being most kind of like forgettable in the bunch because it's not highlighting or something. But I do give him credit actually for, you know, just nailing a Rocky sequel in such a way. Like, this felt like the thrill of seeing a Rocky sequel in the theater, which I've gotten to not do with all of them, but a few of them, and it does have that thrilling funness. You know, they're always really watchable and fun movies. He kind of like breaks out a little bit with getting in too much of his dumb indie dramaness and not really having a script that really kind of nails it. Didn't help either. I probably like this movie a lot more than I should have. I probably like left this theater on a high that really the rest of this film probably it's more about the end boxing sequence, which I thought was amazing. Creed 2 is still a lot of fun. I don't think ultimately if you get through the entire film you won't be disappointed by it. It very much plays like a fun Rocky sequel. I don't really think overall, I don't know if I like it as the highs of like 3 and 4 really gave me, but I still had an amazingly awesome time, and it's something like after I left, I go, I don't know, I'd probably see it a couple more times. The Rocky films have always been a lot of fun for me, and this plays within that, but I think maybe trying to do the seriousness that Creed do was maybe a mistake, and I can see these films kind of leaving that more on as they go on. But the one thing I think, what I thought when I was leaving Creed 2 is Creed 3 cannot keep doing that, and Creed 3 needs to find its own identity and its own villains, and it should have other people that aren't directly connected to the franchise as much as it has. It's pushed it as far as it can go, and it's been a wonderful ride, and it's been a lot of fun, but I think it's maybe this is as far as you can really push it, and you should learn to move on from this, and it's a wonderful this to move on from. So if you've seen Creed 2 and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.